Kaspa versus BSV, okay? So, Kaspa versus original Bitcoin. Now, this might just be a part one because there's still some things about Kaspa I'm not totally sure about, but I'm responding to some comments, and there was a comment that I thought was thought provoking enough to make me um, sort of make a more in depth chat about it. So remember, BSV, we're producing blocks. Okay, somebody produces another block. The nodes are going to be going with whatever the longest chain is. But this doesn't mean that blocks that you see somewhere else are necessarily the blocks themselves. As a completed block, you could think of that as trash, but the transactions in the block, the actual data, are not necessarily trash. And you might think, well, why does that matter? Of course, all the nodes are sending all the transactions all the time. We're just talking about whatever is the first one created, right? But they presented a situation that I want to talk about a little bit. So here we have, our combining anyway, we have a DAG, and I think they have. This is the one thing I'm not really too sure about is what is the meaning of the main center chain, I guess, or the there's like they also create like a kind of a combined chain that they say this is the premium part of the not sure what it's called, but it's like you get one chain out of the whole DAG, and then you can allow the other blocks to be part of the history, but you're trying to make sure that there's still one chain that's certifying when you combine everything globally. So I think what they were talking about is a very interesting situation, okay? Because I was talking with my friends about how Bitcoin would work off-chain. So if you're in a small community, like let's say you have like 20, 30 people, you can be buying and selling things from each other and then using those coins to continue buying and selling without being connected to the internet. And really not worrying necessarily too much about double spending. If it's someone you know and say they double spent, like you would be able to find out who did it and things like that. And it depends on how the situation works. So if you're trying to, it depends on how the agreement you have with people. Because if you're sending family money, like you're not going to try to be double spending. But there was a situation that they were talking about which was a little different, and I thought it was talking about something different. And so let's just say like you got this big divide. So you got a chain here, right, on the one side of the world, United States, and they say no communication. We're going to attack anyone who, by threat of death. You're not allowed to send any data to China, to Russia. China's not allowed to send any data here. Australia's gone in a military state. We're not allowed to send any data there, retrieve any data there. And so you got like these two separate, completely functioning sets of nodes in different countries that somehow are separated from each other and no longer. And they're no longer communicating, so then they eventually have to, if they do communicate in the future, they have to sort of combine these blocks, and then what ends up happening with Bitcoin is you end up throwing one of them out. So all of these nodes are like, oh great, we just lost all our money. But here's the thing, they have incentive now, okay, to be connected. That's one aspect that you have to remember. Because let's say Kaspa is saying, oh, this is the situation that Kaspa is meant to work in. Bitcoin can't handle this, but Kaspa can because we can eventually combine the blocks. But here's the funny thing. Here's the problem that I have with that. Now the nodes do not have incentive. If you're running Kaspa, they don't have this incentive to combine blocks as much then, because that means, I guess, in theory, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, because I got to make sure I understand Kaspa correctly. But what it sounds to me like is what you're saying is that these nodes can start producing blocks locally, and as long as they get merged in the main chain later on, these nodes will essentially get paid for those blocks because they will be part of the global chain. I don't know how, if they have to merge chain first before they get paid. Maybe that's the case, because remember, in Bitcoin you have to have 100 block history in order to actually get paid for anything. You can't. It's not like 2 or 3 blocks. It's 100 blocks deep before the node gets anything from that. So if they don't get 100 blocks deep, and then everyone else goes with a longer chain, those nodes lose everything. It doesn't matter if they build 100 blocks themselves on that or not, because it won't be able to spend it on anything after that, unless they deceived wherever they built the 100 blocks. So maybe that's how it works with these nodes. And maybe they still are incentivized to make sure that they're part of the final global chain. But if you're not incentivized to connect that much, that still opens up then, and if I would believe, too weak of a network incentive-wise. So the network can basically allow for double spends more easily. So say like you are running over here and then running over here, and then sometimes you can combine, but sometimes not. Well, as long as there's a criminal who can connect between the two, and a criminal can send it to an address over there, but then that address doesn't get sent, or maybe he has his own little cult thing or whatever it is, community separated, that criminal, right, can get away with these double spends. So there's an incentive difference. So I was still arguing and saying, like, yeah, the nodes wouldn't get paid. Like, it would be a bad thing for BSV nodes to be building blocks that they would get thrown out because the rest of the world somewhere else might be building more. But if you think about it, you kind of want that, because you don't want your node is something that you're using for a double spend check. You're not just sending your transaction to a friend. Right, you're sending a transaction to a node, and a node needs, for you to service you, it needs to be incentivized, right, to connect with all the other nodes. And the way the double spend check works is it needs to be all of the network. It can't be just some local part of the network with a little bit of hash power. It needs to. The main thing is, it doesn't matter how much hash power that particular node has. The main thing is that node connected with other nodes that are going to see that transaction and then verify, where you can connect with them and ask them, right? So I made sort of a smiley face. But if you think about it, like, you want that incentive there. Because if it's not there, remember I said earlier in the other video, I think Craig would explain sometimes that nodes are entities that essentially create blocks. They don't have to do anything else. The way he said it is just they're not defined. I think he was just saying they're not defined as doing anything else. So I don't think that means they're not meant to do other things. It just has to be incentive based, but they're defined as block creators. But you want them to have an incentive. Like, you want there to be an incentive for the servers that you're contacting to essentially correctly report to you whether something's a double spend, right? So if you're doing that, if you're connecting to one subgroup of them and they said, oh yeah, we got it, but then when they merge somewhere else, there's a time difference and the transaction actually hit over here first, well, then you're still screwed on your transaction, even though they're getting paid for, like, building a partial block that needed to remove a transaction to get merged, I guess, right? Does that make sense? So now they're getting paid to tell you a transaction's good when it's not actually good, and so you're the one who gets screwed out of your money. Whereas if it's BSV, now correct me if that's the wrong understanding. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand Kaspa correctly. All right, I'm just trying to make sure that this is the correct understanding. But whereas with BSV, these nodes, they could build blocks and then they could tell you, oh yeah, it's good, it's not a double spend. But when you start checking on those against, not because you're waiting for confirmation blocks, but because you actually can see the node, you can see these blocks that are being created over time by some nodes that have been severed from the rest of the world. So you're basically saying, well, look, all their incentive is on these blocks. So now I have like this trust, if you will, for these nodes, not because I'm choosing just to trust them because I think they're nice nodes, but because all these blocks had to have been created with a lot of proof of work. So now it's like they have this proof behind it saying like, yeah, our neck is on the, like, there's a knife right here on our neck. Like, you don't have to trust us, but if we're lying to you about this being a double spend, like, we're gonna, we're getting cut in the artery here because right? Because they just spent all that to create all these blocks, expensive. And then when they connect with the rest of the world, if they have to throw that out, well, then they had to pay all that to basically not lie to you, but to give you this false assurance, to give you this false sense of, oh yeah, it's a double spend. So that's what I'm saying. Like BSV, it's like the nodes are like, they're under the gun. It's just like, go ahead, tell me if it's a double spend. And because if it's not, if whatever you tell me, like, you're gonna end up being responsible for that information. Whereas with Kaspa, it's like the nodes are kind of like, okay, well, I don't have to care that much. And it makes it a weird situation because it's like, who's this servicing? Is it servicing the wallets or is it servicing the nodes? You see what I mean? So Kaspa nodes are like, well, we're going to get paid either way. We don't care. But yeah, I saw this one first. I mean, they're telling the truth, but they don't have to care. That's the thing. They don't have to care about checking if they're connected with the rest of the world. So honestly, if the world was in this state of war and you have Russia cut off, you have Australia cut off, you have China cut off, and then you're trying to do payments and you're not sure if something's being double spent. You're like, I think this guy paid me, but I don't know if he double spent to some other nodes that are making blocks somewhere else. I would rather go with Bitcoin because I know whatever nodes I'm talking to, their life is on the line. Like, they got a knife against their neck saying like, this better be the final chain or you're gonna lose a lot. You're gonna get shut down. You're not gonna get paid what you need. Whereas with Kaspa, I wouldn't really like that. I wouldn't want to depend on that because I'd be like, oh yeah, things seem like they're going okay. I'm checking. There's some things showing up in these little blocks, but unless, like I said, you have that combined chain history to prove it, well, how do you know? I mean, these nodes are going to get paid either way, so they're going to tell you, oh yeah, that's not a double spend. And they're telling you the truth that they didn't see another transaction, but when they combine with the other ones, they're going to be like, oh yeah, pay it. We're providing you all this information, all these fees, right? But there's going to be one transaction in there for $1 billion where the fees may be a little like low. They don't care about that, but you're going to care about the $1 billion when that comes across, and that's they're going to say, oh, oops, it looks like there's another block already that we're combining with that's in China, and that money was actually spent there first, so we're going to have to throw that transaction out when we merge these blocks. Because isn't that what you're doing when you're merging the DAG data? Those blocks are not finalized. You have to merge the transactions, because isn't that the whole point of a double spend check? So again, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But I think BSV, right, would work in that situation and Kaspa wouldn't. Now, if you're in a little community where you're disconnected from the internet, you already know that. You don't have any nodes lying to you being like, oh yeah, you're connected, but not really. No, you can still run an SPV. Like, you can still run a server that's saying like, yeah, I'm not a node, I'm not producing blocks, but I'm still like keeping track of transactions and stuff and trying to connect to the internet for you guys, because like that's how we're gonna get our payments finalized. You know, there could be another incentive. You could be paying someone for that or whatever. Like, you could be paying, like, hey, if you show me a block or something, like, show me, because you're going to see a long chain if it connects with a bigger, like, say the rest of the world is connected, but you're not. It'd be easy to prove if somebody does connect, because you're going to have, like, suddenly a bunch of really hard proof of work, like, instantly done that you can cryptographically see. So, like, there's that idea. And plus, like, if you're in a small community and you're off grid, like, let's say like a little village or something, like a little, or even just one little property where you have multiple people living, you can make a few transactions with each other here or there, and then whenever you go and connect to the internet later, you can just, it just gets updated, and you can receive that information, and then you'd be able to see if there was ever a problem with double spend or something weird happening. But otherwise, it doesn't stop you. That's the nice thing about it. It doesn't stop you. The nodes don't stop you from transacting. You can continue adding, like, if you send me a Bitcoin, nickel, say, worth of Bitcoin, like some change, I can break it apart into pennies, or I can send the nickel to someone else, and I can sign it over to them, and then even amongst each other, we can even check for essentially double spends amongst each other with a common pool of data. But we know that's the thing. We know at that point there's not really a reason to produce blocks, and we know that that if they're real blocks, they're going to be incentivized to be global. Whereas if they're not, you don't necessarily need blocks all the time. So the situation that I explained, where Kaspa, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to give it a fair fighting chance, okay? But it sounded like the way Kaspa works is it does not actually incentivize nodes, okay? So if the world was split, okay, so Kaspa doesn't incentivize nodes to be part, to ensure they're the global, ensure their blocks are not a double spend. Or is it true that they have to get paid, they have to be combined in that final one? But how would you know if it's the final one? Because when you're creating the whole point of like two different chains, right, is you can have a DAG over here, right, and then another DAG over here. It's like, how do you globally determine this is the final one, or do they only go back a few blocks? Because if you actually separate two regions, they could believe that they have one and then the other one has another. But then when you combine that group of them together, then what do they decide is the real one? So there's some problem here, right? So when you say if you say it's 100 blocks deep, okay, that's decent distance. That'll take some time. So 100 times 10 minutes. That's going to take a while, right? And all it takes is one connection to come somewhere, and someone to just show that the block has been mined, like show that the proof of work has been done from somewhere, to interrupt a chain to say, hey, nope, not just one number, but you could say you have one that's 70 long, but somewhere else you have all the data for 60 mined blocks, and somebody comes up with like a little bit of data that shows But look, there's this one's 70 long, and here's all the hashes, which is still only a tiny bit of data because it's 70 numbers. All it takes is that, right, to be airdropped somewhere, and they would know, like, oh, whoops, all these blocks are trash, right? So they're extremely incentivized, I would say. It's like a really big incentive. It's like kind of like when you got these countries watching each other, and they know, like, hey, this country is literally trying to nuclear bomb us right now, and so is this country, and so is this country. There's no way they're not going to be watching for those nuclear bombs, right? Because it's like, but this is even more incentive just on them. So a nuclear bomb, like, the government might not care about you and be like, okay, fine, you can bomb this city. Whereas these nodes, it's just them getting paid. It has nothing to do with anybody else protecting anyone else's money. It's just their ability to get paid. They want their block to be in the final chain. So again, blocks are not, so I'm going to clarify this. Blocks are not the same as a double spend check. I know I've explained zeroconf, and you're going to maybe say, but zeroconf is not a block, right? And you're advocating for zeroconf, right? Right, that's correct. But part of the incentive to create blocks that are going to be accepted in 100 blocks in the future is related to the fact that these nodes are going to be communicating to even collect the fees or build these blocks in the first place. And so the fact that the node is incentivized to be connected to the other nodes across the ocean or whatever it is, that's going to be the same thing as them communicating transactions, not just communicating blocks that are finished, but also communicating transactions that they want to be accepted on the other side of the ocean. Because if they don't if there's double spends happening, they might have something that's not accepted over there as a block. So it's the same thing. It's the same incentive. Even though we're talking about two different pieces of data, the incentive to be connected is the same. So maybe you agree, maybe you don't, maybe I'm missing something, but I'm still not convinced about Kaspa. I'm still thinking that if the world gets split, the original Satoshi's consensus design is still the way to go for trying to trust whether your transactions have actually gone through as not just paying someone by signing a coin off grid, but also for the double spend check. If you want to do a double spend check, I would still say Bitcoin is the way to go. So if somebody disagrees, let me know. I do want to debate. I do want to find out what is the truth here, because maybe you're right, or maybe I'm right. And if that's the case, I still want to show why I'm right so that other people know why this is right. You see what I mean? So I hope you guys enjoyed, and hopefully we'll make more episodes. I want to read some comments here. What's the difference between a black guy and a bad? I believe Kappa is little more than a BSV knockoff. Okay, AI to AI. Somebody said hello, Tim. Payment and use BSV as a verification and settlement layer. Why don't you try programming something on BSV like better game than the ones on Handcash? Well, my money situation involves like no time to program anything right now, sadly. But I actually have a situation where if I didn't have some debts, so if you knew someone with some money, I could basically go indefinitely and start coding my parse tree editors and stuff like that, and you could eventually use those for creating opcode related stuff too if you wanted to. But yes, I do have my own ideas for quote unquote changing the world, but until I implement them, it's all talk. Guys, thanks for the comments. I'm glad that at least some people watched. Looks like there's 5 and then there's 3 likes. So I will see you guys later, and I hope you had fun. Looks like it was 25 minutes.